Greetings and welcome to the module on planning. Planning is first of all the most fundamental aspect of administration. In the last module, we have learned about administration and the different functions of administration. And the first aspect of administration is planning. In this module, you will be trying to understand various aspects of planning. So, without planning, there cannot be any programs. Planning in a proper and a systematic way is the building block for good social projects and programs. Technically, planning is a process of thinking, a way in which a particular project can be conceived and developed, and how the activities can be done. In thinking so, the desired goal should also be kept in mind. The document developed in this thinking process is called a plan document or a blueprint. As planning is mostly related to future activities, preparation of a plan requires proper evaluation of the present conditions, especially the capability of the organization at present. Therefore, plans should cover a long-term period to foresee the fulfillment of the commitments of the organization towards the stakeholders. Three main things should be kept in mind while we do planning. One is the organization, two, the individuals, that is the volunteers and the staff working in the organization, and three, the external environment. This refers to the stakeholders and other people involved in the project. These three aspects are listed as dynamic, and exact prediction of the behavior of these three stakeholders, organizations and the individuals is not possible. Hence, planning should be both a dynamic as well as a flexible process. It should be an adaptable process because one never really knows what is going to happen in the future. In this lecture, we will try to understand few things. One, we will try to understand the basic features of planning, we will try to understand the types of planning, and we will try to understand the steps and principles involved in planning. Features of planning. As we discussed earlier, planning is initially a mind function or an intellectual function, and therefore proper documentation of it is required. Every activity planned has to be put down in paper or documented before it is actually performed. Planning as an intellectual activity also requires a lot of conceptual skills, foresight and sound judgment. Planning is goal directed and it is a continuous process. Planning is also all pervasive in all levels of management as well as in functional areas. For example, the CEO or the executive director at the top of the organization plans for the entire organization. Middle level managers makes the quarterly or the half-yearly or the annual plan for the organization. Similarly, grassroots level field supervisors also plan for the monthly and the weekly aspects, and these plans have to be approved by the appropriate superiors or supervisors. Thus, planning is all pervasive. Planning is also futuristic as we discussed. So, past experiences and current situation has to be taken into consideration while we plan. So, planning basically involves making the right choice. Planning also means that plans are not rigid, plans can be flexible and dynamic. Now, we will move into the types of planning. Generally speaking, there are four types of planning, namely operational plans, intermediate plans, contingency plan and strategic plan. Firstly, we will discuss about operational plans. Operational plan is a short range plan which deals with day-to-day maintenance of activities. It gives a clear picture of how the team or a department will contribute to the achievement of the organizational goals. For example, the program head plans a meeting of the staff in his or her own department to impart information or to do a review of the existing program in order to plan for the department for the next quarter or next half year. Intermediate plan. Intermediate plan is usually done in the middle of a fiscal year. Technically, it is also called the mid-year appraisal process. It is followed usually by setting new plans for the rest of the year. For example, in a midterm evaluation meeting, the staff identify the major weakness in implementation of the program. So, based on the suggestions and the shared inputs, intermediate plan is made to overcome the weakness. Third is contingency planning. Contingency planning is usually done to overcome the problems that interferes in getting the work done in the organization. It involves creating an alternative plan in the event of critical conditions in the organization. Thus, it involves having an alternative strategy to deal with the changes which are going to happen in the external environment. Fourth aspect and fourth plan is called the strategic plan. Strategic plan is defined as prioritizing long-term plans that include examining the organizational vision, mission, purpose, philosophy and goals in the light of the changes happening in the external environment. It aims at creating an image of the desired future and designing ways to make plan an effective program. There are different leadership styles, and these leadership style affects the planning in particular organization. John C. Maxwell, a renowned management scholar, identifies 4 types of planning. According to him, the 4 kinds of leadership style in planning involves passive planning, panic planning, scientific planning and people-centered planning. What is passive planning? In passive planning, the leadership allows things to happen as it is or as it comes. This is actually a non-playing or non-planning or careless planning style. Panic planning is another type. Panic planning happens whenever there is a reactionary attempt by the leader to solve a current problem. Most of the leaders in the organization use another type of planning called the scientific planning. Scientific planning is very effective but a laborious process. In scientific planning, leaders have to collect scientific data on various variables such as time, such as employee efficiency, effectiveness to decide which course of action is the best. People-centered planning is another typical style of planning which is practiced in many NGOs and people's organization. It is effective and artistic leadership approach. Principle-centered planning recognizes that life in general cannot be graphed on chart, but admits that planning is still essential. Some of the creative tools used in this kind of principle-centered planning are tools like social audit, participatory planning, participatory research, etc. Principles of planning. According to Chris Hallward, there are 5 basic principles of planning. We will discuss about this in this module. The first important principle of planning is setting goals. Setting goal is absolutely essential to have a clarity on what the organization or the individual wish to do or accomplish. Goals must be specific so that all the people who are in the organization finds it interesting, finds it meaningful and are able to achieve it. Second principle of planning is clarifying the task. Once the goal is defined, it is important that the tasks are listed down and everybody in the team, everyone in the team also understand who does a particular task, and therefore clarifying the task is the second important principle of planning. Third important principle is agreeing on responsibilities. Agreeing on responsibilities means that every task need to be owned by somebody in the team. Most importantly, the respective member should accept this responsibility. Hence, it is more important to bring the team together to agree among themselves on those responsibilities. The fourth important principle of planning is developing a time frame. Time frame is very important to achieve a plan. A plan cannot be an endless process. It is absolutely important for the plan to be within a particular period of time. Hence, the task has to be broken down into subtasks and the time duration for every such task should be clearly recorded. The fifth principle of planning is learning. Effective plans are not only static but dynamic. These frameworks are effective and important for action, and it helps to take decisions about the needs and what can be done and how it can be done in an efficient way. Hence, we need to also capture our experiences as the plan unfolds, and the feedback has to be brought in to the learning process, and the learning process should be a regular one so that that feeds into the futuristic plans as well. Now we move on to the steps in planning. There are 6 steps in planning. We will be discussing about these steps. First step in planning is establishment of objectives of the organization or the project. Planning actually starts with defining the objectives in a more concrete, clear and unambiguous terms. This enables the management to gain clarity on what they have to achieve so that they can plan their activities accordingly. Hence, establishing objectives is the prerequisite for planning. Second step in planning is reviewing the external and the internal environment. Reviewing the internal and external environment means that we understand and relate to the condition existing within the organization as well as in the market, as well as the expectation of various stakeholders, namely the government, the people and the other stakeholders. The study of both internal and external environment enables the organization to know the strength, weakness, opportunities and threats of the organization, commonly called the SWOT, strength, weakness, opportunities, threat analysis. SWOT analysis is a very useful tool for introspection and planning. It helps to evaluate the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats involved in the project. I will give you an example of how the SWOT analysis is carried in a particular organization. The organization, for example, understands that the good reputation it has in the donor market is its strengths. It also finds that shortage of the staff to implement programs at the community level is the weakness, whereas it finds that it is the only organization working in the area, therefore it is an opportunity, and the threat they identify is that large NGOs are trying to start their project in this particular area. So, strength, weakness, opportunities and threats will help the organization to identify and plan the programs in a successful way. The third important aspect of planning is development of the course of action. Various alternative plans have to be developed while planning, because as we discussed earlier, plans are dynamic. As the situation changes, plans have to be flexible and it has to change. Therefore, alternative plans, plan A, plan B and plan C has to be developed along with the original plan. Fourth important aspect is evaluation of the alternatives. Evaluation of the alternative means that the feasibility of the plans and the result it is supposed to generate has to be discussed, deliberated by the management. Certain alternatives may not be practical, hence the management or the core group of the organization should ignore such plans and set feasible alternative plans. The final aspect of planning is selecting the appropriate course of action. As we discussed, after evaluating the alternatives, the manager or the administrator has to select the best possible alternative. In selecting the best course of alternatives, managers should keep in mind their own limitation of the resources, be it human resource or financial resources. So, in making the final decisions, alternative course of action, the management should be guided by the opportunities provided by the external environment and the ability of the management or the organization to take the advantage of these opportunities. After the plans are done, it is also important to implement the plan. So, the key personnel involved in planning should also be involved in implementing the plans. Now, there are certain advantages of the entire planning process. First of all, planning gives direction to the managers and non-managers alike. It gives direction to everybody in the organization. Planning can reduce the impact of the change happening in the organization and outside the organization. Planning also reduces the waste and redundancy which is seen in many organizations. Planning also helps in establishing objectives or standards that can facilitate control. There are certain limitations of planning as well. Planning may create rigidity. People who are used to strict planning may be adverse to any kind of change. Plans can't be developed for a dynamic environment. Formal plans can't replace intuition and creativity in the environment. Planning focuses on managers' attention to today's competition but not on tomorrow's survival instincts. So, these are some of the limitations of planning. So, in this lecture we have learned several things. As you know, we understood that there are 4 major types of planning, namely operational planning, intermediate planning, contingency planning and strategic planning. We also understood that there are 5 principles in planning, namely setting goals, clarifying tasks, agreeing on responsibilities, developing a time frame and learning. We also understood that there are 6 basic steps in planning, namely establishing the objectives, reviewing the external and internal environment, developing alternative course of action, evaluation of the alternatives, selecting the best appropriate course of action and arranging for implementation. Thank you for listening to me.